Let's shift our focus over to the grain markets now. This week we caught up with the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Here's my conversation with Jeff Peterson on Wednesday afternoon. Good to have you here in the studio.
Yeah, it's always enjoyed being here, especially during the summer here. There's always lots to talk about, Price.
There is plenty to talk about. You and I having our conversation midweek. We started the week on Monday, came out with crop progress report. Those numbers showed deteriorating U.S. corn and soybean ratings. So what does the market do? Well, it goes lower. Explain that one to me, Jeff.
That's always that interesting one, isn't it? So you sit back and you think about it. So it kind of all got started probably middle of last week when forecasts started adding a little bit of moisture in. And then we did have some moisture come in, some nice rains across North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, scattered through Minnesota, and then you catch that northern part of Iowa, but you just caught the very northern edge of Illinois, and everybody was looking at that going, well, what are conditions going to do? Well, conditions come down. But the thing about it was, as we started the week, though, we ended up still had the funds long on basically corn and soybeans. They were long about 58,000 contracts. Each contract is 5,000 bushels. That would have been on the corn side. On the soybean side, they're long about 76,000. So they were starting the week with the opinion, hey, you know what, maybe the market can still go higher. But as we progressed through the week, what we did, saw the lower conditions, lower than, not just lower, but lower than what the market was expecting. You came in at 50% good to excellent on the corn side. That was 5% below last week. Trade was only thinking probably 2, maybe 3, and beans came in 3% lower than last week, and trade really wasn't necessarily thinking even they'd be off that much. But when we saw that happen, then the funds, they started getting out, and what we noticed, we have something we can watch in the markets, it's called the open interest, and as we're watching that open interest, what we were seeing is that open interest was declining. What that told us is as we progressed through the week, we physically had individuals at those trend following funds that were long the market, they were selling off those longs. We didn't necessarily have new longs selling and pushing it down. We just had existing longs that were getting out. Now, what's been amazing about this move, and this is kind of goes back to how quickly it went, on the way up, it only took us about 5 days to go from where the market really accelerated this last phase higher, but actually it took us 7 days to go up. I should correct myself there, Bryce, but boy, we pulled back and took all that back in about 5 days.
Yeah, been really quick here. You and I, again, having this conversation on Wednesday. I want to make sure everybody knows that because we don't know what's going to happen to the weather at this point. Eric will tell us here a little bit his outlook, but there is a chance for some rain. The model seemed to be shifting a little bit here. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's the rest of the story on what's going on at the market. So the market comes in, they start selling off, they see some additional moisture coming in, and some of the things I'd say that brings a little more maybe relevancy to it, it's in the shorter term forecast. We're talking probably by the time we get into the weekend where you've got some heavier forecasts actually coming in. And what it looks like is that could bring some rainfall across the southeast part of Nebraska, southern Iowa, also over into the central part of Illinois. But on top of that, the big picture, everybody goes, well, we're in an El Nino, which should mean some better precip. Well, we haven't got it yet, but it sure does look like we've got chances for some additional rain. Now, the direction of the market is going to be dictated on how much rain falls and what do we see for actual moisture coming after that as we get out into next week.
Fingers crossed we see some moisture as a crop producer. That's what you want, but as you're kind of alluding to, one direction, I guess, if we do continue to see some rain is lower, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the thing we see. Now, the thing that's probably just a little bit different, and we're going to talk about really the topsoil and subsoil condition levels in a little bit. The thing that probably helps us a little bit here is that we know that soil is very dry, not just on the very top side, but also down in the subsoil.
Tell me more about that. You track data like nobody else I know personally, Jeff, so tell me, what are you seeing when it comes to the moisture in the ground at the moment?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been watching very closely here. You know, temperature-wise, we watch the temps, we watch the precip, but each week on Mondays, NASS puts out the crop progress information. Generally, the information that gets thought about there is kind of the good to excellent ratings. How are the crops doing? How are they progressing? But at the very back end of the report, they also do report on the topsoil and subsoil. So as you talk about the topsoil, their reporting there is on the top 6 inches of soil. And as you can imagine, that subsoil is very dry. As a matter of fact, we're sitting there at 60%. So what we do is we go through and we tally up basically all the individual states' data, and we say, okay, let's look at the corn and soybean producing areas, and we come up with that basically 60% of the corn and soybean producing areas are short to very short on topsoil moisture within that area. Now, what's interesting about that is as we compare back and look back on that, last year, or basically, let me phrase this another way, when we go back to 2012, that had been the time when we've been a little bit drier than this, it was 62%. But what's interesting is in 2012, though, it did accelerate, and by the time we got to next week, it was all the way to 75% short to very short. Then we come in, we look at the subsoil because we know that the subsoil moisture is very dry. As a matter of fact, the subsoil moisture is sitting at 61% short to very short. And when we looked back to what that was in 2012, it was only 52.7%. So we are much drier in the subsoil, so we don't have as much physically to draw on. Now, the thing I would say, though, is that on the subsoil, as we go into next week, last year it did jump up to about 60.1%. So we know that we're going to have to get some very timely rains in order to be able to keep moving this crop along.
Want to interject a viewer question we received this week has to do with the price of corn. Kind of go back onto that topic. Is $6 corn in the rearview mirror? We've got a question on that front.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say if the rains come in as forecasted and we would get normal rainfall going forward, then I would say $6 is in the rearview mirror. But what I would say is that with this year where we're setting and the spottiness of the showers and the fact that we would physically still have the very dry conditions on that subsoil that we do, I'd say there's still a chance of it yet, Bryce.
There's a chance. That said, what kind of thoughts do you have if you've got corn and soybeans right now, especially on the new crop side? Are you making some sales right now with that in mind?
Yeah, so great question. So I'm going to address also the old crop if you don't mind. So on the old crop side, on both the corn and bean side, if you're down to your remaining, kind of your last few bushels in the bin, I'm okay just kind of sitting here and waiting and seeing, because the reason I'm willing to wait is that this crop is going to probably tassel and probably pollinate just a little bit later than what we normally would. We've got those dry subsoil conditions, so I think it's going to be a little bit harder to get the market to just roll over and stay down. Now, as we move on out to the new crop side, as we take a look at new crop, on corn and beans, if you haven't sold anything in here or you're behind on your sales, I would just kind of still sit and wait in here. Now, what you have to be prepared for, though, is you do have to be prepared for that market to pull back a little bit lower yet. But when it is time to make sales in here, make sure you're using some of the hedge to arrive. We think basis will improve, especially on the new crop side yet.
All right, Jeff, we're going to pause our conversation there. Do want to make our viewers aware we're going to have a special report with you on Friday, a couple of USDA reports coming out. You and I'll break that down. That'll be available on the Market Journal YouTube page. We'll see you then.
All right, sounds great.